Hi everyone, my name is Rabbi Abram Goodstein, and I gave this sermon on October 23rd. This week's Torah portion is all about the story of Noah and the flood. Now, for some reason, this biblical tale has really captured the imagination of Western society. So many people who are not religious know this story. And perhaps there's something compelling about a good family attempting to save the animal kingdom from destruction. Perhaps it's our strange love for apocalyptic literature. Whatever the reason, it has broad appeal, which for me has been strange because I have never liked this story. My issue with it is simple. How could God kill off humanity for being too evil? What kind of choice is that? Especially when a percentage of that humanity were children. This is the same humanity that God worked so hard to build and nurture into a moral and free-thinking society, and apparently it only has one decent family to offer the world. However, I'm not one to ignore something because it is difficult, and I always try to find meaning in even the most senseless of acts. So I feel I need to discover my own way to make this story meaningful for me. And a while back, I finally decided the story of Noah teaches us that a destructive force is also a creative force, and vice versa. A creative force can be a destructive force. It's not simple or an easy answer, and certainly it can be painful, but it seems to be the nature of the world that we live in. Before COVID, I was really proud of myself for developing this takeaway. It was easy coming to this conclusion when there was no pandemic threat against our world. Now, facing a destructive force like COVID, I find my takeaway tested by this reality. And I think I'm still only beginning to understand how truly painful such a destructive force has become. And something I've come to discover is that destruction isn't just coincidental or an accidental part of our lives. It's the nature of the world that we live in. Whether it's a pandemic, an earthquake, a wildfire, or a hurricane, it's unstoppable. And this is a doubly hard predicament. Not only does it fill our world with uncertainty, but we also have no control over it. And this is a difficult way to understand our environment. Yet it's still a truth about the world we live in. Unstoppable, destructive forces will always be a part of our lives, personally, communally, and globally. And while I do spend a lot of time hating it, I also spend some time trying to find meaning from it. Which is why I find a destructive force is a creative force to be a helpful perspective. And I do believe that the story of Noah is not just an event, but a process that can give destruction meaning. The destruction of humanity due to its wickedness is a very painful process on like a ridiculous level. In the story of Noah, it left room for the growth and improvement of humanity. Without Noah and his actions, the story would have no value. This idea does help me to understand COVID just a bit better. Congregation Beth Shalom has some pretty creative reactions to the painful way COVID destroyed the way we come together as a community. We've been forced to rely more on technology, and thanks to that process, we found new and meaningful ways to integrate technology into our worship services and gatherings, which maybe you're experiencing now. And these are most likely permanent changes. We don't plan to stop using what we learned, even if we come back to in-person gatherings. And this message from the story of Noah's Ark can help us understand our own environment. Even like COVID that disrupt our lives and hurt us emotionally, mentally, and of course physically, are difficult to manage and painful. But with such limited control over such an unstoppable force, I feel that one of the things I can control is how I understand these events. For me, when painful events are placed in the context of a process, a destructive force can be a creative force. It's possible to give those events meaning, which can make them just a bit easier to bear. Now, I'm not saying that thinking of COVID or other natural disasters this way is helpful for everyone. I do encourage that each person finds a way to draw out something meaningful for them from painful events. Thinking a destructive force as a creative force is just one possible tool. But here's an example of using such a tool. When Europe was hit with the bubonic plague and almost a third of the population died, it was a travesty tantamount to the story of Noah. But the plague also hit right after harvest time, and suddenly there was a huge surplus of food. This surplus helped Europe enter into the Renaissance, an era of human enlightenment. A destructive force brought along a creative force. Now, this doesn't justify the deaths, trauma, and heartache that occurred at that time. All it does is provide a little bit of meaning that makes this loss a bit easier to bear. So while I have a difficult time bearing the loss of humanity for the sake of one family, I understand that in the story of Noah, this painful process allowed humanity to grow into a moral and ethical society. When God displays the rainbow as a promise that God will never destroy the world again, God also displays a creative response from enduring something disruptive. I'm not sure what the rainbow will look like when COVID is no longer controlling our lives. But I'll certainly have much healthier respect for how fast and complete a microscopic force can destroy and recreate our world. And I won't take for granted the valuable lessons we learned from it, or the meaningful things I learned because of it. Thank you.